Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be asking 3 questions that we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days and answering them. But before we do, as we do each week, we take our themes, our questions that we answer here on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out every Monday. Either in LinkedIn version or by email. And I'll be dropping the link to the newsletter site where you can subscribe at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. I'll also be dropping in the chat the email version of that as well as the LinkedIn version so you can have a look to see if that might be something you wish to subscribe to. And I will say between the 2 versions, both the LinkedIn and the email version, we now have well over 2,000 subscribers. So we're very excited that so many international educators are getting this weekly news digest in their inboxes or in their LinkedIn notifications every week. It's such a refreshing reminder to me about the importance of our community, international education community, and how small and tight-knit we all are. And we take the time each week with this live chat to really go in depth into some of the topics of the day in our field that really reflect the kinds of themes that we see resonating in our daily work in international education. And one of the reasons we do that here at SMIE Consulting is to share with you our thoughts on some of the key issues of the day, because I've been there. In fact, I am there now. I work for a University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I do this on the side. I've been doing this for well over 6 years now in terms of the weekly live chats, also doing the newsletter. And between those 2 newsletters and the live chats, we really have a fairly significant reach in the international community, and really happy to be doing these lives with you here. We know most folks aren't able to watch the lives, but most watch on repeat, either on Facebook, LinkedIn, or on YouTube. We also have a podcast, audio-only podcast version of the Roundup available that you can subscribe to in all your major podcast providers. So please do that if you haven't already, as well as the newsletter subscription to either the email version or the LinkedIn version. So thanks again for making SMIE Consulting a part of your international edification each week. So let's get to our questions. First up is, what defines a vibrant campus community for international students? We all talk about it, right? We have our brochures, our video content, our emails, and other social media posts that we put out every week to future students. And we paint the picture for, hopefully, what their life might be like if they chose to attend your campus. And none of us would say we wouldn't have a vibrant campus community, but what really does that mean? And are we really preaching the right message that matches what's actually happening on campus? Now, this is something I've been advocating for years at all the institutions I've worked at in terms of keeping your finger on the pulse of what's really going on your campus and how what you do is being perceived by your intended audiences. And that is your current students. And you want to know if they are having good experiences while they're on your campus, and if you are succeeding in delivering on your mission and the message that you routinely share with future students. So this means some work, because the kind of work that goes into finding out these details is not easy. I mean, you have to do focus groups with your current students to see if what you're saying is actually what is being received in terms of services and vibe on your campus, and that's an important piece of the puzzle. All of us will say we have a vibrant campus, but what does that actually mean on your campus? And the folks at INTED, who we routinely cite each week in our newsletter, they put out an outstanding blog every week that has some really solid nuggets of information for international educators to use as they are putting together strategic plans to reach students in key markets, or overall strategies that have marketing language involved. And the one this past week was, So You Think You Have a Campus Community. So this is again what we were talking about earlier. It's something that our marketing messages all say we do have, but what does that actually mean for our campus? So what they've done in the article, and we're talking about here, finding out that information about what you're actually delivering, is brainstorming with your marketing team about not just your institutional values and how they are being lived out or sent to future students, but how international students are receiving those. Because what your messages are institutionally for domestic audiences are probably going to be different than what the messages are that you would be sending to your international students, just because of things like financial aid messages that don't, unless you're one of the few that has financial aid for international students. Financial aid means something very different for a domestic audience than it does for a international audience. So what are you doing to really help those international students understand concepts like what kind of aid is available as an international student on your campus? So they talk about that. It's about distinguishing those messages. So the values might be the same, but how they're interpreted internationally will be very different. We had a similar challenge at UNLV when I first started. We have 4 key values that are part of all our marketing messages, but 2 of them didn't really apply well as written to international students because of things like financial aid and other things like that. So what we're doing is really taking, this article does take the approach to be focusing on your international audiences and figuring out what that actually means. Are you doing focus groups with your new students as they arrived on campus to find out information about how they view the recruitment process and messaging received at that point, and then doing exit interviews with your soon-to-be graduates or current students somewhere in the middle of their journey? How have their experiences reflected on your messaging? Is it aligning well with what you're trying to do? So it's not something that you're simply going to get from looking at a survey that you might send out to students. You actually have to put in some hard work to get the kind of data that you need and stories that reflect, yes, we are delivering on what we're promising, or no, we're not. We have some real issues we need to address in how we message, or for probably how you deliver services that you say you're delivering but maybe aren't. So that's certainly something that every campus should be working towards, is delivering on what they promise. We all work with service providers out there, having conversations with folks in the last couple of days with institutions that have signed on with international ed providers, ed tech providers in the last couple of years that have promised the moon and significantly under-delivered on those promises. And that's common in our field on the service provider side, that a lot of these international ed tech startups, they get VC funding and they push the boat out really far and maybe overextend in terms of what they're promising just to get new clients. And as a result, there's a boom-bust cycle here where after a year or 2 of really trying too hard and not delivering, then they are forced to cut staff. And it's really the corporate world that they're operating in. And in higher ed, we don't typically like that kind of that significant amount of change, even though it seems like in some campuses, change is the only constant, particularly post-pandemic. So how you reflect in your messaging what you're actually delivering is an important piece of that puzzle. And the intl article really does an exceptional job in laying out the kinds of things you need to be thinking about as you're putting together the pieces for delivering a sense of community and what that means. Sports teams are one of the examples that they use, if that's a selling point. Winning championships builds community, as they say. But what are the other things that showcase that community on your campus? Is it the celebrations? It's a Mid-Autumn Festival today. So Chinese heritage and a lot of Asian communities are celebrating across the world. Are they doing that on your campus? Is that helping breed a sense of community for your international students on campus and others that maybe are trying to really connect with your international audiences on campus? Is that helping? Is your local community, not just your campus, involved in those kind of activities? So these are the kinds of things that when you talk about an on-campus sense of community, versus an online sense of community. What does that look like? And that's certainly something to have clear in terms of what you're delivering on. So great article from INTED, and making sure that how you show your community off to your future students is something that you want to make sure you're in alignment with what you're actually delivering on. So that's a great first question of the week, and certainly what defines it on your campus is going to be different from what defines it on my campus and others around the U.S. So take the time to really dig in and find out that kind of data and stories and truth in advertising kind of things that you want to feel like you're delivering on, and that's a really important piece of that journey that you want to make sure you're satisfied that you are communicating effectively and delivering on what you promise. So let's move on to our second question of the day, which is what matters most for international students in deciding where they attend. Now, we've been talking here on the Roundup for a number of years about the importance of outcomes for international students in terms of particularly post-pandemic, and even a little bit before the pandemic, you saw a significant rise in the percentage of students in prospective student surveys as well as applicant surveys of those that have identified career prospects, not necessarily reputation of the university as a quality institution, but in terms of reputation, in terms of delivering the content you need, delivering the messaging that you are promising to future students in terms of their career outcomes, job satisfaction information, initial salaries of graduates, those that progress and go on to universities to post other study at university. All of these things have risen in significance for prospective students and current students in terms of deciding where they attend. It's where they know that they have the best possibilities for employment, not necessarily just in that country that they're going to, but for when they return to their home country with a degree. So are you delivering on that? So this is something that you certainly want to know and have documented in your communications with future students, is the kind of data that future students want to have, ideally, that is not just 80% of our graduates have jobs within 6 months of graduation. I think most U.S. colleges have something like that. That's a generic for all of our graduates. But how many of you actually have data that speaks to 80% of our international students who choose to apply for OPT have jobs within 3 months of applying? How many are in that category? And if you don't have that specific data and salary data to back that up in the various majors that they're typically graduating in, do you have the anecdotal stories that you can share from some of your key source markets for students in terms of recent graduates and jobs that they've gotten that you can capture in video testimonials and make that a part of the future recruitment efforts in circling in those messages of your successful recent grads into what you're promoting to future students, because they want to hear that. So the question here about what matters most is coming out of a couple of articles, one of which is from ICIF Monitor, a regular source of quality information, and it asks, is employability still the holy grail for new generation of international students? And this is coming from Nanette Ripmeister, who is the Director of Expertise in Labor Mobility and also serves as the Director of Performance Benchmarking for ISB, the International Student Barometer, in Europe and North America. And the simple answer is yes, it is still the holy grail. So the survey results show that future career impact from the ISB, which is the largest single student survey with well over 192,000 survey responses that were in the most recent survey, that they had 96% said future career impact had topped the list for 96% of why international students choose a higher education institution. And the other things like country reputation scored number 7 on the list. Institution reputation scored 3 on the list. But you do see the number of students that are focused on graduate outcomes has only increased in the last 5 years. So that article certainly reflects well on proving the point that really we need to be focusing on that. And where oftentimes universities do fall short is on the career services side in terms of capturing that information to really speak specifically to international students that are going through the process. Does your career services office, or in larger colleges where you have individual folks in career services in business and engineering and hospitality like we do at UNLV, that handle internships and potential job placements? Do they, and they liaise with the university-wide career services, but are they capturing the kind of data you need to use and then convince future students that you have successful international graduates? And ultimately you want to say yes to that question, and until you have the data to prove it and or the anecdotal stories, hopefully the combination of both, you're going to be falling short in terms of meeting that expectation that future students have when they're evaluating your institution for job success. If they don't see those opportunities well documented, then they may not count you as high on their list of institutions that they will want to attend. So we see a lot of institutions really identifying this as one of the most significant challenges internationally, is delivering on job outcomes data for future international students to find. So that's certainly something we really want to pay special attention to. And there's another article from QS in their magazine called in their Insights magazine, and a recent edition featured a column called Extracurricular Advantage, addressing inequality in universities' extracurricular career support. So this has a lot to do with, again, what we were talking about earlier. Is your career services center have the right kind of mentor programs, workshops that help prepare your international students for the job market, for the interview process, for writing a resume, for attending job fairs, internship fairs, all of that? Are they ready? Because they have different rules that apply to them as opposed to the average domestic student at a U.S. institution. So are they prepared to answer those kinds of questions for international students and really be proactive in terms of educating them far enough in advance so that they know what the institution's process is for CPT? The International Student Office certainly is the implementer of these things, but they need to work with International Office needs to work with career services on all of these things related to employment and outcomes and that type of thing to make sure there is a smooth transition. That yes, International Students Office will do the paperwork, the new I-20s for CPT, but the career services folks need to get them plugged in with the right people, with the right opportunities, and know those career services folks need to know that, hey, as an international student, they have to, if they're applying for an internship, there are specific things they can and can't do. So as it relates to what is CPT allowed for CPT and what is not on your particular campus. So the QS article does go through a lot of the kinds of details that we're talking about here, and I really, if you're not already spending the time to focus in this very, very important piece of the puzzle, right at the end of that puzzle, that journey for international students where they've enrolled and gotten on campus and gone through orientation and gotten settled in classes, and they're getting towards the end of their degree, they're starting to think about these things more intently than not just knowing what those outcomes are, but certainly what the process is, how successful will I be. They want to know these things, particularly as closer they get to graduation. And preparing them as well as you can for that is part of that international student journey that can really make or break their success at your institution. Are they getting the right kind of preparation, the right kind of support to make sure that when they go for that first internship interview, prepare their CV or resume, that when they're ready for applying for jobs and they're going to these massive job fairs, are they able to focus their attention on those employers that actually will hire international students? All the things that really matter most, you need to be able to answer for them. So a really good piece from QS and the ISEF Monitor International Student Barometer data that really helps, I think, paint a very clear picture for institutions these days that unless you have quality data and anecdotal stories to back it up on the student employment front for your international students, not just generic student employment data in terms of recent graduates and that, but are you able to get that kind of very focused data for international audiences? Unless you're there and producing that regularly, you're missing opportunities to really answer one of the most significant questions. In fact, the most significant question international students have when they're choosing where to attend is, what are my career outcomes going to be? If they don't feel comfortable saying it's better at this your institution than another institution, then you're missing out. It might be a different country's institution that they're going to feel like they have a better chance of future career success that if they choose that institution. And it could be because they provide that information that they seek and you don't. So that's an important piece of the puzzle that you really need to have a laser focus on and make sure your initial marketing materials to your future students have it. But if you don't have it, put a plan together that helps you get to that point in the next year or two so that you can begin to better anticipate the needs of your future international student prospects. All right, so let's get on to the last question of the day, and that is, do government restrictions impact international student interest? And oh my gosh, the answer to this question is, oh my goodness, yes. So it's like a duh question, but we certainly want to explain what that actually looks like. And there's 3 countries right now that have had imposed restrictions on international students, significant ones in the last year: UK, Canada, Australia. We're going to focus on Canada and Australia today. And the first article is from the Free Press Journal, which is a Mumbai-focused journal in India, which is the #1 source market for international students studying in Canada. And the article title is "Cap on International Students to Severely Damage Australia's Reputation and Economy." And there's another one on Canada that, I'm sorry, I'll share that one as well. That's from India Today, called "Canada's Study Visa Approvals for Indian Students to Drop 55% in 2024. So for both India and for India, the US, UK, Canada, Australia are the top destinations for Indian students. Canada is by far the largest destination for Indian students in terms of overall numbers. They have well over, I think it was 350, or actually well over 400,000 Indians studying in Canada last year. And that is a combination primarily, almost, well, I don't know the exact breakdown, but mostly on the vocational level, because in Canada, the vocational route has been used as a way to cut a couple of years out of the journey to start working in Canada right away and a shorter path to eventual residency. These 2 countries with the caps that were imposed in Canada last year, which was initially going to be a 35% cap or reduction in the number of study permits that Canada would issue to admitted international students. That number that was the goal of the IRCC, and the reality is closer to 45%. So what Canada set out to do is to limit, and they had very good reasons to limit. Their resources on services, health services, on housing in a lot of key areas, key cities around the country were stretched thin and forcing international students into really terrible situations. And there's been in both Canada and Australia, other countries as well, but some significant abuse from agents that were dodgy, as the Aussies call them, but certainly providers that were shortcutting processes or providing applicants with false credentials as they applied for visas, and really causing significant challenges in immigration to those different countries for study, but also really the real reason was for employment and work. So in Canada's case, 35% cap was the goal. The reality is 45% is what the reality for new study permits, 45% reduction in study permits for Canadian students this year so far. And for India specifically, their largest market, they're talking 50% reduction in study permits. So the damage has been done for Canada because they said we're going to have cuts, and what the reality in terms of what was heard back in India, and there were other political factors that were impacting Canada's reputation in India with some expulsions of diplomats from Canada that were in India, and vice versa over the death of a Canadian citizen of Indian origin who was murdered, and the thought was it might have, in Canada, that it was traced back to members of or some way to the Indian government, and that led to a very ugly political spat, and it had a knock-on effect on top of the government saying there's going to be a cut because our services are stretched thin, we don't have housing in a lot of places. So it's kind of a double whammy for Canada as it relates to India. So damage is certainly happening in Canada. In Australia, it's happening. Has been happening for a couple of years, where there have been post-pandemic huge surges in Indians studying in Australia, trying to what they call a two-step migration process, where they come in as quickly as they can, much like they do in Canada for vocational education, even though they have qualifications that say they should be applying for master's degrees or doctoral programs. They come in and do these vocational programs in a year or two as a quick route to working in Australia. And that's that second two-step migration. They finish their quick degree and then can begin working right away. So the article from the Free Press Journal says cap on international students to severely damage Australia's reputation. Now, what is happening in Australia? They've put a cap of new study permits or study visas for for the next academic year, which starts in 2025. They are saying they're going to have only 270,000 total study permits issued. And only of that number, only 145,000 are going to university level students. The rest will be divided between vocational and English language and pre-university level work. So that 145,000 is going to be divided amongst the 30 plus universities. 145,000 international students next year. It's going to be divided. And that means that there's going to be far fewer places these institutions will be able to offer to international applicants. So what will that mean for Indian applicants and for Chinese and other major destination markets? How are they going to get in to Australia? They're seeing significant cuts happening. So will this be a way will there be a way or as much interest from India and other key markets for Australia, for Canada, because of these cuts and restrictions that the governments have put in place in the last year? And the short answer is, of course, there won't be as many. It's going to have a significant impact. We're already seeing it in Canada. We've seen it already happening in the UK with their dependent study ban, and the numbers for the fall have been down 17 to 27%, somewhere in that range for new students. A little early to get the full numbers for fall 24, but as their campuses are just starting up their academic years. But you really see a lot of challenges in countries where the governments have made decisions because they were oversubscribed. And this is what I always come back to. In the United States, we do not have this challenge. We do not have, in 95% of our college campuses in the United States, do not have over-enrollment of international students. There are overall 5 to 6% of our total higher ed population is international students. In Australia, Canada, UK, it's anywhere between 25 to 35% on a lot of these college campuses. That's why these governments have stepped up and started imposing these restrictions, because the campuses overseas in these other major markets generally are not residential campuses. So they rely on local communities to house their students. particularly those coming from abroad. So if there's been these huge jumps in the number of students from abroad coming to these campuses that don't have purpose-built housing for international students, how do these local communities absorb all these extra people that don't have adequate housing? And that's the real rub, and that's what's caused pushback. There's why all those extra people put pressure on local services, health services in particular, and other services that cities and local communities offer. So we don't have that challenge. Most of our campuses in the U.S. have purpose-built housing for students. We're residential campuses. Most international universities overseas are not. So they don't have the ability to absorb all these students into their communities easily. So we have that capacity. We're only at 5-6% total. We have purpose-built housing for students, and we have generally better services that are, though costly for health insurance in particular, are available for international students. So we don't have that real challenge as these other destinations have, and have had restrictions put in place because they've oversubscribed, plain and simple. That's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. So we appreciate you being a part of the conversation today and wish you the very best and look forward to chatting with you. Next week, I will be in Brazil on a recruitment trip for UNLV. So may not be able to do a live, but certainly we'll be back in the office the following week at the beginning of October before we head out again to Vietnam. So until next time, have a great week, and we look forward to chatting with you soon. Cheers.